So Brian, a couple things that I've done here with this demonstration user group is I've kind of stripped down all of the menus and eliminated a lot of the noise that you would otherwise see within the system, just to kind of make it easier to kind of reinforce, hopefully, where you can find these items within the EAM menu structure. So I've logged into the system and I've set up a very, very simple view into EAM. Maintenance pattern screen is in the same place that you would find the PM schedule screen. I've hidden everything else other than the maintenance pattern screens in this case, but it's found under the work menu, work order planning, maintenance patterns. So I think just about everyone that has used EAM is probably familiar with the traditional PM scheduling screen. One of the inherent challenges that we've had traditionally with the PM schedule screen is the PM nesting, where you have minor service intervals, say an oil change on a car, and you also have an oil change due on that car with major service. So, you have an oil change that you go in every 3,000 miles, got to get your oil changed. At 15,000 miles, you need to have your oil changed, the tires rotated, your air filters replaced, maybe the windshield wipers are also going to be replaced, kind of thing. But PM nesting was the original attempt to prevent a minor work order from being released and due at the same time that a major work order is going to be performed that also includes that minor service. So maintenance patterns is, in my mind, a great way to kind of streamline and better understand the maintenance that needs to be done without trying to work through the nuances of nesting, which to anybody that has used PM nesting, I think would agree is a big challenge. It's not an easy thing to do. Work orders do get bypassed due to nesting, but it's a real challenging thing to set up and configure.
Okay.
So on the maintenance pattern side, I've kind of streamlined the screen as well and kind of trimmed down the fields and the things that that we really need in order to kind of point through the very key things associated with a maintenance pattern. In this case, I have an example that I've created, named it Clark OM 1205A, and it's basically for a series of forklifts that we have in our plant. When I create a maintenance pattern, I just basically give it the maintenance pattern code analogous to or similar to a PM schedule code, entirely up to you in terms of what you'd like to convention that you'd like to use to name those. What type of maintenance pattern do we want to create? Is it a repetitive, recurring maintenance pattern, or has the equipment reached its end of life and we just need to run this out for another year? And once we reach that finite point in time, the maintenance pattern stops. I haven't personally used those. I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, or potentially with that other option, the execute once, that could be a leased piece of equipment that you have for a certain amount of time that that
Absolutely.
Your pattern might expire. Okay. Great.
Yeah, we know that we're going to plan, 5 years down the road or a year down the road, we're going to be turning this equipment back in. So we don't need the pattern and that equipment associated with the pattern to repeat. But excellent point. Typically, though, maintenance patterns are set up as repeat maintenance pattern types, such that when the pattern reaches its endpoint, it's going to repeat and loop back to the first sequence in the pattern.
Okay.
We tell the system when we want the pattern to start. Maintenance patterns can be either time-based or hours-based, or both, combination thereof. The system does support multiple meters. So if you have two different types of meters that you're capturing readings from, the system does support two different types. That one could be hours, the other could be the number of cycles that something has run, any number of combination thereof. So in this case, in this example, I just set up 1 meter, and I've also set up a time component indicating that I want my pattern to start on 12/10 of 2022. And from here, I'm just going to click over to the sequences tab. So within a maintenance pattern, we need to tell the system what our maintenance pattern is. So if I had just purchased a new forklift, my sequence 10 would be my starting point, and it would basically say, hey, at 450 hours or 6 months, we need to perform maintenance on this lift. The second item in the series or the sequence is a 900-hour or a 12-month service. The third item is another 450 hour or 6-month service. And then at the 1800 hour or 18-month point in time, we need to perform an annual or an 18-month service, a major service that would include components of both the 6 and the 12-month services.
Okay.
So I'm going to re-expand the bottom section of the screen there and just kind of talk about each one of these. So my 450 hour service, there is a standard work order that you do need to create as part of the maintenance pattern. The standard work order type does need to be specified as a maintenance pattern standard work order. Standard work orders are basically work templates. You kind of build out the activities, task plans, checklists, things that you need to do as part of the work activity. Once that has been defined, you can select the standard work order. It will pull in the work order description based on how that was written on the standard work order by default, but you can update that if you'd like. Calculate from basis. When do we want this pattern of maintenance to start? Is it based on the close date of the previous work order? Is it based on a due date or a scheduled start date of the work order, of the previous work order? Which if we're looking at it from a sequence 10 standpoint would have been sequence 30, as I've outlined it here. How often am I going to perform the work? So setting these up is very similar to a PM schedule. We want to perform this sequence 6 months after the completion of the prior work order, and or 450 hours. So we're capturing the hour readings off of the equipment at periodic interval. We want the service to start either based on time or based on the hour reading of the equipment itself. And again, it does support 2 levels of meters. So I define that for each sequence in the pattern. So my next sequence is a 900-hour service. This one is also going to be performed 6 months after the close date of the previous work order, which in this case would be from sequence 10 and or at 450 hours and so forth. The next sequence is another 450-hour service. So this would kind of be the minor service, the oil change on a car. Hey, in between our 900-hour and 1800-hour service, we do need to, say, change the oil in between there.
Okay.
Once I've defined the sequences, I'm going to add the equipment that I want to be associated with this particular pattern. In this case, I just have a simple example, one piece of equipment. One of the things that I find most challenging when setting up a maintenance pattern is kind of defining where in the pattern does each piece of equipment need to start. If you're starting out with new equipment, you have, it's pretty easy because you're pretty much working off of the owner's guide for that in terms of the manufacturer's recommendation. Hey, this car has 0 miles. At 3,000 miles, we need to start we need to do the oil change. But for equipment that's already in service or used equipment, maybe fleet equipment that you purchase or acquire from another company, you'll have to kind of go through on an equipment by equipment basis and determine what is the next proper sequence of maintenance that needs to be performed on this equipment. Not unlike what we have to do with PM schedules. We have to do the same kind of exercise with PM schedules. But so if I add a piece of equipment, in this case, the maintenance patterns do support routes just like they do in the PM scheduling side of things. So if you needed to establish a route of fire extinguisher servicing, say, you can establish a route for those fire extinguishers, so you're kind of logically flowing through your plant and checking off all fire extinguishers in the most optimal work path that you can kind of come up with for that. Maintenance patterns can also be used to effectively fully replace PM schedules. In that if we set up a maintenance pattern as a repeat type of maintenance pattern and we only have one sequence, so an annual inspection of fire extinguishers as my last example, you can do that with a maintenance pattern as well if you prefer to go down that path as opposed to setting up a PM schedule, and just have one sequence in the pattern. Once you've completed that sequence, it'll just loop back and kind of create work orders that are awaiting a release 1 year from today, just like the PM scheduling side of the system does. So if I add a piece of equipment, and I'll just come up with just show you one little thing here that I find a little on the tricky side when I'm setting up a maintenance pattern. I can't type. Forklift. So I just did a search against the equipment. I'm going to select the record, say OK, and add it to the pattern. So at this point, everything at the bottom was kind of, you know, blanked out. It was grayed out, protected. I couldn't update or enter any information in terms of when this piece of equipment is due from a meter standpoint, or when it's due from an actual time-based standpoint. So if you'll notice at the top here, the status of the equipment, whenever you add equipment to a maintenance pattern, is always going to be inactive.
Mm-hmm.
The step that I find a little burdensome is having to activate each piece of equipment. So you do need to go select the piece of equipment that you want to activate, go to the actions menu and indicate that you want to activate the maintenance pattern. If I had added multiple pieces of equipment, what you would see here in this list at the bottom is all of the equipment that's not yet been activated against this particular pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have to do is when we're activating the equipment against the maintenance pattern is define where in the sequence do we want this pattern to start. Do we want to start it at the beginning sequence? If it's new equipment, the answer is yeah, you want to start it at the beginning sequence. If it's used equipment or equipment that's already in use, you'll need to determine where exactly in this pattern does the next maintenance cycle fall for that equipment.
Okay. All makes
So
sense.
I can start it at any point. I can start it at the end. So if I buy a used 2010 BMW for my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
you may find that there is some that you might need to do the major service first, the first thing you do with the car, and get the timing belts and things like that replaced. So you define where in the sequence you're going to start, and you can also specify for time-based service. You can also define when does that next date need to be due. When is the next meter due for the piece of equipment? 660 hours, say.
Mm-hmm.
Or 450, we'll say this next one's due at 450 is when it's due. It's a new piece of equipment. Select the equipment that I want to attach to this starting point. So if you have new equipment, you could specify and use this little checkbox in the upper left of the header. You can select all the equipment that you might want to activate at the same time with the same pattern starting point. But in many cases, it's almost a case-by-case basis where you have to select each individual piece of equipment because there is variability of the fleet that's already, or equipment that's already in use. It's going to depend on your operation and your equipment and when those next maintenance work orders are due. But you select the equipment, click submit, and in this case, we got an error. Meter 1 due cannot be entered because the equipment does not have a unit of measure specified to the meter screen of the equipment. So in this case, I did not actually add a meter to the equipment. So I'm just going to clear that field out instead and resubmit. So I hadn't actually told the system that we have an hours-based meter for this forklift. So it gave me an error, but because it's saying, hey, I don't know what meter to attach this equipment to because you haven't defined one. So once your status of the equipment is active, a work order will be created based on the information that we just told the system for that equipment. The work order that I just created was this first item here. Work order 11341 was just created in an awaiting release status with a scheduled start date of 12/28/22. You'll see that there's also some work orders that are here. That's for the other piece of equipment that I had previously added to the maintenance pattern, but I kind of wanted to just talk through what we're seeing here. So there's another awaiting release work order that's attached to the second piece of equipment. And where is my equipment tab? Oh, there it is right there. So FL 2450 is the piece of equipment we just added to the pattern. 65100 is another forklift that we have in the system that we've run through the maintenance pattern and complete. So you see all the work orders that are associated with this maintenance pattern, just like you would the work orders tab on the PM schedule. It kind of tells you what's sitting here queued up, waiting to be released at some point in the future, either based on time or based on a meter reading or meter reading interval. And you'll see that there are different sequences assigned to these. So our starting point for this piece of equipment originally, for the 65-100, was sequence 20. We completed that work order. The system then issued another work order that originally was in an awaiting release status against sequence 30. Sequence 30 is the last sequence in our pattern. Okay, so once we've completed that work order, since we specified this as a repetitive maintenance pattern, we want this to repeat into the future, the next work order created was applied against sequence 10.
So let me ask you a question about the work orders awaiting release. If the scheduled due date, start date is hit, or we meet the threshold on the meter readings, will those work orders be automatically released?
Yes, they will.
The queue? Okay.
Yes, they will. That's a really good question. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. But yes, the awaiting release work orders for maintenance patterns will automatically release as soon as you have reached that due date or that scheduled start date, and or the meter reading has gone beyond what's been defined within the pattern as the next meter too.